Welcome to Coming About with David Paragamian, the podcast that dives deep into the minds of leaders who have transformed their businesses and industries, paving the way for a better future. Here's Dave.
For this edition of Coming About, I'm joined by Ed Mitzen, who is a serial entrepreneur, a two-time founder of very successful advertising agencies, and a co-founder of a really fascinating nonprofit, Business for Good. So someone who, by job title, resists easy characterization, which I think is going to make for a really fun conversation today. So Ed, thank you so much and welcome to Coming About.
No, thanks for having me.
Really appreciate it. Well, Ed, as I mentioned in the intro, you are someone that has founded and built multiple advertising agencies. You have co-founded and built a nonprofit that's doing a lot of things in the capital region, in the Albany region in New York State. But I want to start because my premise, and as you know, the book Coming About is all about this fascinating topic for me of how people make pivots and choices, and they make these brave decisions to say, I'm going to stop doing this and I'm going to go do that. And your personal life and your career is full of all of these great pivot moments and these choices that you've made to go from one career path to a second career path, to build from the first to the second to the third. So if you don't mind, I'd love to start by understanding about the foundation. You started out after graduating from Syracuse, you were carrying a bag in pharma. Tell the listener a little bit about what you learned. Why was that a good foundation for you as a start?
So I graduated college in 1989. And at the time I was trying to go to medical school. My grades weren't really up to par in school. So I needed to sort of find another career choice. And I really loved the sciences. I was a biology major. And I felt like, to be perfectly candid, it was a good paying job back in the late 80s. And, you know, I grew up very lower middle class, and I found out they give you a company car and you get to still work in healthcare and science. So for me, it was a dream job. I did carry the bag for a couple of years. Felt like I learned 95% of the job and got to be a little complacent and figured I should probably go and do something different, because otherwise I'm just going to sort of coast in this position, and I didn't really want to do that. So I pivoted, went in-house and did market research and marketing for a healthcare company. And then after grad school, took a job out in Columbus, Ohio for a healthcare company. I got the map out. I didn't know where Columbus was. So I got the map out, and the first thing my wife says is, "Oh my God, it's next to Kentucky." And we ended up loving Columbus. We moved out there for about 4 years. It was an incredible job working for a company called Cardinal Health. But it was exhausting. I was working 80-hour days, and I had 2 young children at the time. And I remember feeling, if I was working, I felt like I was a crappy father because I wasn't home with the kids. And if I was home with the kids, I felt guilty that, my career is going to suffer. I should be working harder to help pay for these mouths. And it finally came to a head back in 1997. I was 30 years old. My wife was washing up for bed, and I had just come home. I was exhausted. And she asked me to watch our 1-year-old son. And I was watching ESPN, and he was on the bed, and I wasn't paying attention, and he rolled off the bed. And fortunately, he was okay. But my wife came in, ready to tear me a new one. And my eyes filled up with water, and I said, I just can't do this anymore. And I resigned the next day, sort of like Cortez burning his ships. And that's when I decided to start my own business.
Wow. Well, you're a great storyteller, Ed. I want to grab a couple threads. One was the insight and the courage you had as a young person to say, hey, this pharma sales job is a dream job. I get paid well, and I'm in healthcare, which I always wanted to be in, but gosh, I'm coasting. You said it was getting easy. You were coasting. You didn't want to get complacent. So that's an interesting thing for the listener to think about, that one of the reasons for the pivot and the change was you were too comfortable. And I think for a lot of people, there's this concept of comfort is good. But what I'm hearing you say is you got to a point where you said, I don't want to be in my 20s and complacent. I need to take myself out of my comfort zone, right?
Yeah, and you got to a point where you were able to get good commissions by working smart, not necessarily by working too hard. And I felt like at that point in my life and my career, I wanted to sort of continue to grow and evolve and learn different skills and meet new people. And the pharma job is very isolating. As you know, you're in your car for 8-9 hours a day to see somebody for probably 30 minutes over the whole day. And the rest of the time you're driving around by yourself. And it was just very, like I said, it was very isolating. And I felt like if I'm going to broaden my experience, I need to be in a position where I'm networking, where I'm meeting a lot of new people, exposed to new things. And it got to be sort of very repetitive.
So there's a brave moment that was the pivot into Cardinal, and then maybe the bravest moment, and you did the great visual metaphor with Hernan Cortez and telling his men to burn the ships there when they were going to go conquer the Aztec Empire. But, you had that moment where Sports Center turned out to be more important than watching your son for a brief moment.
Right.
And the very next day you were brave enough to go in and say, okay, I'm done. I'd love to hear a little bit about, okay, how did you decide the beginning embers there that were going to be the coals that stoked what became Paleo, an incredibly successful agency that you built, that you ran, that you ultimately sold to one of the larger networks. But I'd love to hear that, again, that the courage, the drive, what looks to the outside person as fearlessness, but I'll bet that there was a little bit of fear in all of that. So I'd love to hear that story.
Oh, it was terrifying. I mean, we had a mortgage, and to walk away from a decent paying job, my wife didn't work. And I had decided that I was going to sort of hang a shingle out and do marketing consulting in healthcare. I was fortunate in that the job that I had in Columbus, I was able to meet a ton of people in the industry. So I decided to do marketing consulting. I had built up a pretty good network of business relationships, and I feel like I built up some credibility. People knew that I was a good person and would work hard. And to be honest, at that point, I called up a lot of the guys that I knew and women that I knew in the industry and said, look, I'll do anything, any project you need, doesn't matter how big or how small. And I was able to get 1 or 2 contracts right out of the gate that basically gave me a couple of months of oxygen. So I knew that, the mortgage would be covered and the grocery bill, would be paid. And then it just started to grow. And I got more and more business. I remember I hired my first employee, which was terrifying because now not only am I worried about my family, but now I got to worry about his and making sure that I've got enough business for him. He left a good job to come and join me. And so with that comes a ton of responsibility. And it was, but it was just sort of one foot in front of the other. I remember thinking when I started, I said, look, it's not going to fail because I'm not going to put the effort in. I knew I was going to work as hard as anybody. And I felt like that would sort of carry me through. And it worked out.
There's 2 themes you just hit on that I want to get out my little yellow student's highlighter and highlight in the book, Professor. One is about hard work, because it seems like that willingness to do what's required, to grind it out, is a theme in your entire life, in every job, even in building, I'm sure, the nonprofits that you're building. So I want to carry the hard work theme through. But I also heard you say something about your concern for that first employee that you hired. And I know that's another theme that I think for the listener, and I know it's hard for you to talk about because you're a very humble person, but that concern for others and what's the right thing to do for others is a theme I know that ripples through. It's going to be part of our Fingerpaint story. It's going to be part of our Business for Good story. That idea of taking care of the team,
right?
That's a key part of, I think, who you are. I'm wondering where that came from. Is there a story in your life that takes us all the way back to why you are the consummate teammate and you're worried about the other people in the huddle?
When I was in 4th grade, I was the quarterback of a Pop Warner football team. And I kept getting sacked all the time, and the guys weren't blocking for me, and they were dropping passes. And I remember like getting on them and screaming at them like some maniac. I was sitting at the dinner table with my parents, and my father said, basically the translation was, they don't want to play for you because they think you're a jerk. and all you do is yell at them. And I remember crying at the dinner table. And from then I went back, and instead of yelling at people, I sort of patted them on the back and was self-effacing, and I saw instant results that these guys responded, even as 10-year-olds or however old we were, to that positive feeling, as opposed to me, trying to rule by intimidation, if you will. And that stuck with me my whole life. And I always felt, and still to this day feel, tremendous gratitude for anybody that joins any of the businesses that I'm responsible for. I recognize that it's a job for them, but they still, it's putting food on their table. It's putting a roof over their heads. It may be helping to pay for a kid to go to college. And I always felt like my responsibility was, if they gave me their very best and they were good people and treated others with respect, that I had a responsibility to make sure that they always had a home with me. And that was, I had to make sure that we had enough business coming in to keep everybody busy. But that feeling and that compassion for the folks that worked for me has been a real key to our successes over the years. People know that if I'm asking them to work harder or come in over a weekend, it's not so that I can go buy a boat. It's so that we can continue to pump more money back into the company, give people raises, good benefits, bonuses. And I just feel so appreciative of everybody that works. I mean, you and I have worked in the same industry for a long, long time. It's not for the faint of heart. The hours can be awful. The client demands can be insane. So you've got to try to make people feel appreciated and rewarded and have them know that you've got their back. My experience has shown that they'll work till their fingers bleed if they know that you're a good person and you're doing it for all the right reasons.
Yeah, there's that famous Peter Drucker business school line about culture eats strategy for breakfast. And
right.
And for me, my asterisk I'd append on that is it eats it for lunch and dinner too. I totally believe that, culture is everything, that the hard metrics, revenue and profit and client retention, all those things, they come from the soft metrics of getting the culture right. You've built two incredibly successful advertising agencies in our industry. The first, Paleo, that was sold to one of the holding companies. And, you're currently executive chairperson of the Fingerpaint Group, which is a very large, started as a single office, but has become a very large agency group with a diverse offering and offices in multiple states and including an office in the UK. I think it would be interesting for the listener to hear how that thread about caring for people has carried through at those companies. Yes, you run an advertising agency, you've got a P&L. Yes, you're pitching business, you're winning business, you're running a business. But I know that you've done some incredibly special things for taking care of your employees from a cultural perspective. And I think a lot of folks think that, well, great, if we put a free lunch in the cafeteria on Friday, if we set up a ping pong table, we've done culture. And to me, those are all the superficial trappings. It's like putting veneer on the walls. You've done some really deeply rooted things for culture in terms of a policy you have about whether you've fired people, a policy you've had on paying off student loan debt that folks had. I'd love to hear you talk about some of those things that are the deeply rooted parts of culture that have worked so well for your companies.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of levels of building a good culture. I think, obviously at the macro level, showing people that you're giving them great benefits, that, the pay is obviously good, that you're sharing in the financial success back with the staff that's making it possible. And then I always personally, because I was really experiencing the financial rewards of their work, my wife and I would look for ways to acknowledge people in very different ways. So we at one point paid about $4.5 million of student loan debt across the company. I think we had 125 people at the time that had student loan debt, and we were able to wipe out like 85 of those, and the rest had significantly lower debt than they had, the day before. And we've done things like that. But I think the other thing too is that a lot of times you don't have to spend $4.5 million to have a good culture. We do little things like send pies to, people's homes for Thanksgiving, or we'll do pop-up holiday flower shops in the office where people can come in and grab a place setting or a wreath or a table setting. And we try to look for those little touches that show people that we care. And then the other thing too is teaching the managers that I can't legislate a good culture. It's got to come from them too. So, as we've gotten bigger, we now have almost 800 employees. I don't know that John Smith is a Rangers fan, but if he worked, above and beyond for a couple of weeks, that manager should feel empowered to get him a couple of Ranger tickets for a game. Or, it's short money. It's a couple of $100, but I have found that people will respond so positively to that versus, hey, here's another we spot bonus you $300, because it goes into paycheck and it ends up going for bills. I remember years ago, I had an account director who really was killing it, working really hard. We won a big pitch. And at lunch, I said, hey, we're going on a field trip. So she gets in my car and we drive over. She had just, she had been snowboarding and really loved it. So I went and we went to a ski shop and I bought her new snowboarding equipment on the spot. It was about $600. And I'm sure to this day, she probably remembers that. It's those little things, those personal touches that people, I think, really, it really resonates with them. And for me, I've always felt like if I can find the best people, reward them whenever I can and whenever it's justified, that ultimately that will produce great work, and then the revenue will come as a result of that. So I think a lot of companies, they chase revenue first, and we've always felt like let's go about it a little bit differently, and the money will come. And that's worked out pretty well for us.
Yeah, so many things about that story I love. I love also the knowing someone well enough to know that the right motivation is for the same $300 instead of a Amex gift card or the money in the paycheck, the Ranger ticket was the right answer, or the trip to the ski shop. And you're absolutely right. People, I think, remember those acts of kindness because they were personal. I got a note recently from someone that worked in an agency that I ran almost 20 years ago. And she said, I was having a conversation at dinner with my husband the other night about the time when I was early in my career and I kept all of my dress shoes in a garbage can under my desk because I was in New York City and commuting in flats. And then when I had to go see the client, I'd put on a pair of the different shoes I had in the garbage can. And one night, the custodian crew mistakenly threw out all of her shoes. When I had heard the story a day or so later, I sought her out and said, look, here's a check. We're going to take you to the shoe store. Like, you go buy a handful of pair of shoes. And she said, I was retelling my husband that story because, in 20 something years of business, it has stuck with me. And I was humbled, but it connects for me in the same way that you're talking about, which is when you reward people in a way that's authentic and personal, that you really know them and you care about them, it pays itself back so much better than cash. I mean, I think the great learning in all of this story is that people don't really leave companies because the place next door offered them $5 more. They leave because the person that they are following, the leader that they have been asked, isn't really nurturing them in the way that clearly you've done at the two agencies you've built. You should write your second book on purely this. I know that there is a book called More Than a Number that is a great narrative of the early days of the Fingerpaint Group, but I think you are truly the PhD on this.
I appreciate that.
All right, don't go anywhere, Ed. We'll be right back. And in the next part of this fascinating conversation with Ed Mitzen, the brilliant mind behind the creation of the Fingerpaint Group, the best-selling author, and the visionary entrepreneur, Ed reveals how he and his wife Lisa have now made a major pivot and are focused on changing the world with their nonprofit organization.
We started this foundation, Business for Good, with the idea that we were going to use business and entrepreneurship to show people in underserved communities that they can get up the income curve through business and starting their own companies or growing the businesses that they already had.
This has been Coming About. We hope these conversations have left you feeling empowered and ready to take your organization to the next level. To speak with Dave about your business transformation or to learn more about Health Monitor Network, go to healthmonitornetwork.com. And don't forget to check out his book, Coming About: How We Transformed a Major Media Company and the Lessons There for You. Available wherever books are sold. Coming About with David Paragamian is a production of Advantage Audio.